It's now my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speaker. Danielle Parr is the Executive Director of the Entertainment Software Association of Canada and the Chief Spokesman for the video game industry in Canada. Ms. Parr has worked for several years as a political aide in various provincial and federal governments, including the offices of 2 provincial premiers, 2 provincial cabinet ministers, and a federal party leader. In 2002, she was featured in Maclean's magazine as one of the Canada's top 25 leaders of tomorrow. This year, she was named by the Hill Times as one of the top 100 lobbyists on Parliament Hill. A Winnipeg native, she now lives in Toronto with her husband and son, and her second right around the corner. Would you please help me welcome Danielle Parr?
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. For the past few weeks, my colleagues have all sort of been living in fear of the fact that I might actually give birth before I got to do this speech today. So, pending any exciting developments over the course of the next few minutes, I thank my son-to-be for his patience and cooperation. I'm quite thrilled to be here with you today to release new research about the Canadian video game industry. The Entertainment Software Association of Canada is the trade association that represents some of the largest video games in Canada. And we also conduct research about the whole industry to make sure there's reliable and accurate data about the sector. So before I begin, I'll just mention a couple of members of our board who are actually sitting at the head table. Joan Ramsey from THQ and Michelle Liam from Disney. Thank you both for being here. At first blush, it might seem a little bit surprising that you're here at the Empire Club to hear a speech about video games. Usually when people think about video games, I think they think about it in the context of what their kids are doing, what their friends are talking about, or what their spouse is playing or isn't doing, such as mowing the lawn or some other important job. But what people don't often realize is that video games are big business, and that Canada is particularly good at making video games. Most importantly, they don't realize that the video game industry is actually one of the fastest growing segments of the global economy. So the fact that you're here at this recognized and respected forum to hear about Canada's video game industry actually makes perfect sense. It's recognition of the changing nature of our economy and the importance that creative industries like ours are going to play in the future prosperity of this country. The research that we're unveiling today was conducted over the past few months by Secor Consulting in Toronto, and it's definitely the most thorough and reliable research on this industry that's ever been conducted in Canada. The report does differ from other research done in this sector in the past in terms of methodology and approach, so may not be directly comparable to other research that's been previously published. But I'd definitely like to commend the team at Secor for their expert development and management of a survey that was sent to hundreds of small, medium, and large-sized companies in Canada in order to gauge the size and economic impact of this industry. This work will no doubt be used as a benchmark for other research in this sector in the future. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to those in attendance today from our industry who participated in the consultation process and who contributed their input and expertise to the project. People are often impressed when you tell them that some of the world's most successful video games are developed here in Canada. In fact, it makes great cocktail party conversation when you can talk about world-famous games or franchises like Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, Homeworld, Need for Speed, Splinter Cell, NHL, FIFA Soccer. Some of you may have actually even played some of these games, and that were developed right here in the Great White North. But I think what people find especially shocking is that Canada is home to one of the largest video game industries in the world. And in true Canadian fashion, the response when I ever raise this is, why? How? Incredulous that Canada could possibly have one of the most successful industries at anything other than oil and gas or forestry or sort of one of the more traditional industries. Particularly an industry as cool and sexy as making video games. But there's a story behind the development of each of these successful franchises and a broader story about the success of Canada as a destination to make these world-class games. Today, with the help of the report's findings, I'd like to talk about the factors that have led to the rise of the Canadian video game industry. But before I do that, for those of you who aren't familiar with the process of making games, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what goes into the making of these games that will be purchased, downloaded, and enjoyed around the world. Generally, I think when people think of video games, they think of either arcade-style games, PC games, or games that you'd play on a dedicated game console. But the industry has evolved to also include games that can be played on anything from social networks like Facebook or on smartphones. If you have small children, you know this is invaluable on airplanes. In addition to consoles that are now connected to the internet, and of course also computers that permit gamers to store and play their games in the cloud. The actual making of a video game is a major endeavor that involves developing technology and tools used to build the game, the writing of a compelling storyline and characters that will capture the imagination of gamers, and the technical and artistic expertise to translate a concept into a playable piece of software. There are the middleware companies who develop the tools, developers who actually create the games, and publishers who traditionally finance the creation and bring the game to market. So those are the broad general categories that game companies fall into, but there's an infinite array of business models depending on the type of game that you produce and the platform that you produce it for. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail later. But another fact that I think people often find surprising is that the average age of a video gamer is 33 years old. So this isn't just kid stuff anymore. And, you know, there may be some closet gamers out here in the audience today, because apparently 47% of Canadian households own a video game console. That's not to mention all of the other devices that people use to play games. So let's now get into some of the research. The Canada's video game industry is conservatively estimated to be worth $1.7 billion to the Canadian economy, and it's growing. Over the past 2 years, despite an economic recession, it's grown by an estimated 11% per year, and it's expected to grow even more rapidly over the next 2 years at 17% annually, well above projected growth for the economy overall. This is especially impressive when you consider that the market for Canadian-made games is global and is certainly more dependent on the health of the world economy than just what's happening domestically in Canada. There are roughly 350 video game companies from coast to coast, with a broad mix of different sizes and with differing concentrations on particular game platforms. Although the large companies account for about 60% of employment, the vast majority of companies in Canada average only 16 employees each. Most game companies in Canada are clustered in 3 major areas: Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. But there are, in fact, development studios right across the country, including places like Edmonton, London, St. Catharines, Ontario, Quebec City, and even St. John's, Newfoundland. The research reveals that Quebec has actually matured to be the dominant player in Canada. While only 1/4 of the total companies are located in Quebec, over half of the industry's jobs, or over 8,200 of them, are there, with a high concentration of large companies in that province. Their growth rate has been at about 13% over the past 2 years, slightly above the overall Canadian level, but it's expected to converge with the national average over the next couple of years. Here in Ontario, a different picture emerges. There are more companies in this province than in Quebec, but this province only has 1/3 of Quebec's industry mass measured in terms of jobs and economic activity. Ontario, however, is also experiencing more rapid growth than Quebec at 20% over the last 2 years. This is likely due to the smaller average size of companies in Ontario that tend to exhibit faster growth than more established companies do. And companies in Ontario are also increasing their share of resources to mobile, social, and casual games at a faster rate than Quebec. There's also a new tax credit in Ontario. BC is situated somewhere between Quebec and Ontario with respect to economic activity levels and number of employees. While a few rounds of layoffs have inhibited industry growth in BC over the last couple of years, our survey results indicate that there's some expectation of growth over the coming couple of years, especially as many employees start up their own ventures. And, you know, they might also get a Stanley Cup in the next few weeks. There are a variety of factors that have played a role in creating this footprint in Canada. Some of it's happened organically, but in large part, it's due to targeted efforts by regional governments to specifically attract and nurture the growth of this industry. Earlier, I mentioned the diversity of platforms that companies are now developing for. So by measuring the estimated resources that companies dedicated to each game platform, we found that the Canadian industry remains heavily concentrated around traditional console game development and publishing. So that's to say PC games or games for video game consoles like the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, or the Nintendo Wii. As an aside, you might be surprised to know that some of the technology for the Xbox or the Microsoft Kinect was actually developed right here in Canada. And it's now the fastest selling consumer electronic device in history. We are also seeing rapid growth in resources dedicated to social, mobile, casual, and massively multiplayer online games. So what I mean by that are games like iPhone games, games you can play on Facebook, and with a 39% penetration rate for smartphones in Canada, the trend towards low-cost apps for these and other portable devices, the market for casual and mobile games has actually exploded over the past few years. However, we found companies don't necessarily develop for just one type of platform. The majority of firms are focusing their resources on a number of different platforms simultaneously, reflecting the evolution in the industry towards newer markets. For example, companies may take an established intellectual property and make different versions, sometimes even different episodes or different experiences, and make them available to consumers on a wider variety of platforms. So this extends the life of the IP and widens the market for it as well, and provides new and more diverse experiences for gamers. As an example, EA has transported its Need for Speed franchise from the PC to consoles, and it's now also available on smartphones and on the iPad. It could cost about almost 10 times more to develop a high-end console game for the mass market, which is what we in the industry refer to as a AAA game, than some of the mobile and social games that are being developed, not only at a lower cost, but in a fraction of the time. Development costs for traditional console games can be as much as $30 million or higher. What's more, a few bad reviews or high rates of piracy can severely limit the success of a major video game title, which typically makes the majority of its revenues in the first few weeks after its release. But a successful AAA title can still make hundreds of millions of dollars, as is the case for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which broke the $1 billion, or the $1 billion mark in sales not too long ago. $100 billion would be nice, though. So while the risks can be very high, so can the returns. But not every game achieves that level of success. I think the temptation now is to assume that the future will be all about making cheaper, less intensive games. But not every mobile game can be as successful as Angry Birds, which was downloaded over 200 million times worldwide. For every successful game, there are hundreds of games that don't even get noticed. With the explosion of downloadable games that are now being created due to the lower barriers to entry, it's become very difficult to break through the fray and establish a loyal following. All this to say that the video game industry will continue to produce games for a variety of different platforms with an even bigger array of business models, including free-to-play or ad-supported web-based games, games that make money on traditional downloadable content or on additional downloadable content, or in microtransactions or through subscription-based games. So in terms of people, today there are approximately 16,000 people working in video games in Canada. Those are direct employees. It's estimated that another 11,000 are employed through indirect and induced activity. This makes Canada's video game industry the world's third largest after the US and Japan. Or we're number one on a per capita basis. We're clearly punching well above our weight. The question is why? Well, one of our advantages is that Canada is considered a full-service location for video game production. This means that publishers have access to high-caliber facilities for game development, animation, interactive design, marketing, audio, acting and voiceover, motion capture, and in some cases, all in the same city. And motion capture, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a very cool technology. They put sensors all over an actor's body and then literally capture their movements, playing basketball or doing karate or whatever it is that they're doing, so that the characters in the game are as true to life as possible. And some of the same technology that they use in motion pictures is used, and in some cases has been used for some time by the video game industry. In fact, James Cameron worked closely with Ubisoft in Montreal to develop technology used in games for his blockbuster Avatar. Now, Ubisoft has opened its own movie division to further the links between movies and games, something that's also been done by companies like Disney and Warner Brothers, to name a few. Our business, like many other industries, is global in scope. We're making video games that will be sold and enjoyed all over the world, here in Canada. And in fact, if we were only making games for the very limited and small Canadian market, we'd be out of business pretty quick. Not only is it a global business, but it's an incredibly competitive one at that. Many countries covet these types of jobs, particularly in an industry like ours, which is showing continued prospects for growth. By acting as a full-service hub for the creation and development of video games, Canada has actually built a very strong reputation for quality. Our talent base has been nurtured over 20 years, and a virtuous loop's been created. The development of commercially successful titles in Canada brings an influx of other studios or work to Canadian studios, which also increases the experience levels of staff, as well as the number of developers, artists, and senior managers in the country. And this is a critical factor. Talent is probably the most central aspect of Canada's success as a world leader in video game development. In industries that depend on intellectual property, your product is only as good as the people that are creating it. And the availability of talent is the most important factor cited as to why businesses would establish a game studio in a particular location. So while the availability of new, well-trained graduates is important, and in fact 60% of Canadian gaming companies are expecting to hire new grads this year, which is also expected to increase to 77% by 2013. Without experienced talent to manage and execute projects, this industry cannot excel and continue to produce world-class games. Attracting and retaining these pools of qualified workers is one of the industry's toughest challenges in a competitive global environment. Competition is fierce, and the pool of available talent is still very small, given that we're still a fairly young industry. But we have another advantage in that educational programs in colleges and universities across Canada are generally considered to be producing well-trained graduates in approximately the right quantities to fill entry-level positions in the industry. For instance, cégeps in Quebec have been helpful in training affordable quality assurance and testing support for game developers before they go on to further studies at the university level. But as of yet, there are no standards for what ought to be taught in post-secondary programs, especially given the quick transition and introduction cycles in the technology used to make and to play games. One of the report's recommendations is that industry and educational institutions should build greater collaborations to better prepare students for the work in the fast-paced and evolving video game industry. And a few such initiatives are underway, including one in particular, EIGHT, the Hamilton Institute for Interactive Digital Media, which is a partnership between Silicon Knights, McMaster, the Art Gallery of Hamilton, and Mohawk College. A game industry-focused MBA program that would help mid to senior level game company managers and executives is also an interesting idea worth exploring. So no, Ryerson, maybe take notes. Canada definitely has an edge when it comes to talent. But in return, the presence of this talent is also great news for Canada. It has measurable benefits for our economy and also for our cities. Hiring young and well-paid workers has had an effect on the revitalization of some urban neighborhoods in Canada. The Mile End District in Montreal, Yaletown in Vancouver, and now here in Toronto, in the Junction, where Ubisoft has just set up a new shop. They've all felt very positive economic effects with the influx of hip urbanites that live close to where they work. The Canadian video game industry provides high-paying, high-quality jobs in this country. In 2011, the average salary for employees at Canadian companies was $62,000, which is almost twice as much as the Canadian median income of $29,000. It's more than twice as much. These jobs are knowledge-intensive, team-oriented, and fast-paced. And they're also typically held by workers that are younger than the Canadian average, which is one of the groups that's been most affected by unemployment as a result of the recession. The fact that video games are both creative and technical productions means that the industry helps develop a wide range of skills in technology, creative arts, and management, and this has application in other industries as well, including software development, film, TV and music production, interactive design, architecture, and even medicine and simulations, just to name a few. Creating hybrid skills like that makes this industry quite valuable, as it boosts Canada's competitiveness in the digital economy in a wide swath of other sectors as well. So with this picture of the Canadian video game industry in mind, you can see a sector that's come an awfully long way since Distinctive Software, which is considered to be a Canadian pioneer in the video game industry, was first purchased by EA in 1991. Other major game studios were started in Canada and acquired by multinational companies, while others were built from the ground up with domestic and foreign investment. While a large majority of the large companies are now fully integrated multinationals with presence in Europe, Asia, and the US, it's fair to say that our industry is a made-in-Canada success story. A historically favorable exchange rate, shared time zones with the US, and our geographic position between Europe and Asia are all factors that have helped Canada's video game industry to prosper. But perhaps one of the key factors in the rise of the Canadian game sector has been government support. The federal SR&ED tax incentive program provides tax credits for R&D related expenditures and is highly used in our industry. At the provincial level, Ontario, Quebec, and BC, for example, have all instituted refundable tax credits on labour, ranging from 17.5% in BC to 37.5% in Quebec and up to 40% here in Ontario for eligible expenses. These tax credits have helped to spur growth, most notably in Quebec. And in fact, two major studios, THQ and Warner Brothers, as well as a new one that was just announced this morning, are currently being set up in Montreal, in part because of the aggressive positioning by that province vis-a-vis other jurisdictions. And as a result, this has created fierce competition for talent within the Montreal game development community. There is some concern that the dependence of the industry on government tax credits and similar programs could prove to be unsustainable should these programs be withdrawn in the future. And competition from other jurisdictions could severely affect Canada's prospects in the future should government support falter. With our dollar at par with the US, our historic currency advantage has now disappeared. Canada faces increasingly stiff competition from South Korea, France, Australia, and the US, where there are 21 states which currently offer some kind of tax relief applicable to video game companies. We strongly believe that governments in Canada have an important role to play in the ongoing growth of our sector. The industry is anxiously awaiting more details about the federal government's digital economy strategy. Many countries have devoted entire ministries or government departments to deal head-on with the specific needs of digital industries. As our economy transitions to new digital sectors, a plan is needed to make sure Canada gets this right the first time in order to maintain our global competitiveness. ESAC has made recommendations to government on this front, many of which were adopted by the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage in its recent report on emerging and digital media, and which are fully echoed by the findings in our new research. And as a shameless lobbyist, I'd be remiss not to mention some of our policy recommendations today. In terms of content, we've said that a comprehensive digital strategy for our economy should position digital content at its core. After all, it's content in all its various forms that drive technological progress. A government approach that recognizes the interrelationships and linkages between various segments of the digital ecosystem will help various creative industries beyond video games. It'll foster innovation in technology and communications and ultimately drive further growth. Intellectual property protection. This must also be at the heart of the government's plans for the digital economy. We're pleased to hear that the Harper government plans to reintroduce legislation to modernize our copyright system in the upcoming session of Parliament. For the video game industry, as for other creative industries, this is crucial. ESAC has recommended that Canada prioritize training and education in traditional areas such as mathematics and technology, but also in disciplines such as art, animation, visual effects, game design, and sound design, which also lead to high-value, high-paying jobs. For talent being brought in from other countries, more needs to be done to remove the barriers to labour mobility. The long delay imposed by immigration procedures for skilled workers outside of Canada is one such issue. Expanding existing hiring programs and adjusting cumbersome international recruitment processes will not only address unmet domestic supply of skilled employees, but could also spur skills and knowledge transfer and the retention of high-value workers. And financing. Well, large publishers of video games generally have adequate resources to or adequate access to financing through internal resources and long-term relationships with banks. Smaller Canadian publishers and developers typically have great difficulty securing financing for their projects. Banks are generally averse, and game companies, by their nature, have relatively few hard assets to pledge as collateral for project loans. Venture capital, which has been a significant source of funding to the wider information technology community, hasn't been as prevalent in Canadian video game companies. For companies that require relatively small amounts of money to develop their games, such as mobile or social game developers, there's been a strong reliance on friends and family, angel investing, and even crowdsourced financing to build up funding for projects. In the face of this gap, government programs that enable game companies to reduce expenses or that provide funding for research and development or for marketing and associated travel expenses have been very helpful. ESAC has recommended that the federal government increase its focus on the commercialization of R&D and direct investment in commercially viable projects. Specifically, new funds should be allocated to existing or interactive digital media funds, not only for the domestic market, but as a way to support world-class Canadian content destined for international audiences as well. Improving the existing SR and ED program by broadening its narrow scope would also help. Introducing a new interactive digital media tax credit for video game development at the federal level could close the gap between various provincial jurisdictions and help build this industry further. For Canada's lead to be maintained, for us to maintain our first place position, governments need to remain vigilant and in tune with the quickly evolving nature of its digital sectors. So as most of the North American video game industry converges on Los Angeles next week for the annual Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3, which is the largest video game trade show in the world, Canada can feel very proud of its thriving video game industry. A number of exciting new video games from Canada will be unveiled to the world, and once again, our creativity and ingenuity is sure to shine. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. Our guest speakers agreed to take a couple of questions. First question. The Sony online gaming network was recently hacked, where tens of millions of user information was stolen. What precautions can Canada take to enforce the security of personal information and data?
Well, let me just say this is a case that's currently under investigation. So I know that sounds like a very political answer, but I think what people are forgetting in this situation is that hacking into this information, into this network, is a crime that was conducted by criminals. We have laws in place, and those laws are being enforced, and justice is being pursued against these people.
How can an individual get involved in the video game industry?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different opportunities, and I think people sort of typically think of, you know, I want to work in the video game industry, I need to be an engineer. And absolutely there are jobs for engineers. There are also jobs for people in business, in public relations, in the arts. You know, if you're an actor, you can do voiceover. If you're an artist, you can draw background scenery. If you're a writer, you can write scripts. So there's really a wide variety of opportunities that are available. And so if people are interested, I would say, you know, explore what opportunities are available here in Canada. I mean, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver all have there's tremendous competition for talent. So if you're skilled in any of these areas, I don't think you'll have trouble finding a home.
What is your stance on online currency and virtual goods currently being implemented in games like Farmville and Angry Birds?
We actually don't have an official position on that. I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting development. I think we saw similar things with some virtual worlds also. Second Life, for example, has its own currency. So it's quite interesting. You know, we don't have a position as a trade association, but it just goes to show, I think, that people have these other lives online, and they're living very rich experiences in the virtual world, and it's kind of fascinating.
With the decreased emphasis on culture and the arts in the city's budget, where does this leave the local GTA creative community in terms of support?
Well, from our industry's perspective, I think we've been very well supported by the provincial government here. They've really made our industry a priority and have targeted the growth of our sector. I think because they see the value of the high tech, highly skilled nature, coupled with kind of the creative side of the business as well. So from our industry's perspective, I think we're definitely garnering the attention of government, and we're looking forward to getting even more receptivity from our new federal government in Ottawa.
Last question. As more games use online and mobile technologies, what risk faces Canada's gaming industry as consumers face bandwidth cap and limitations on empresa data plans?
Well, I think that issue is maybe a little bit misunderstood in the sense that there have always been data caps through the big major providers of services. And so the change has really been, I think, with wholesale providers. But certainly, as gamers, I think it's important for gamers to speak out on issues that matter to them and make their voices known at election time, in forums. I mean, you sort of, in the US, they've actually created this whole online gamer network, the Video Game Voter Network, where they're actually actively getting involved in terms of lobbying for policies that matter to them as gamers. And I think it's an interesting development, and maybe something we'll see in Canada. Thank you.
I would like to ask David Tate to come and do the formal thank you. David.
Thank you, Tim. I just wanted to point out, I think on all of your tables there's a tent card, and that will point you to the SACOR website, where we have the full text of the report that was done for the Entertainment Software Association, and the Entertainment Software Association website will also have the full text downloadable if you are interested in seeing the full report and reading a little more. So on behalf of James Buchanan, our managing partner, and myself and the SACOR consulting team that worked on this engagement, we wanted to express our thanks to the Entertainment Software Association, and there are a couple of people that were instrumental in getting this report pulled together, and I'll just mention Jason Key, Julian Lavoie, Jeanette Holder, and Stephen Thompson, who provided a lot of support. They were a great team to work with. But especially thank Danielle, who was able to hang on long enough to get to today and to get to our presentation. So if you just join me in showing appreciation for Danielle.
Thank you, David. Danielle, as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with a book just called Who Said That? Memorable Notes, Quotes, and Anecdotes selected from the Empire Club of Canada's speeches 1903 to 2003. Thank you very much. Finally, each one of you should have in front of you a list of upcoming events. I am pleased to let you know that we have a great lineup, and we still hopefully are going to get at least one more in. We're just waiting to hear. But on Thursday, John Laforette, the president of Wind Concerns Ontario, will be at the concert hall here in the Royal York, and that promises to be quite a controversial lunch, so hopefully you can join us. Thursday, June 9th, 2011, in the same room at the concert hall, we have Alfred Apps, who is the past president of the Empire Club and president of the Liberal Party of Canada. As we all know, there's lots going on over there, or not as much as there used to be, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Alfred promises to be controversial, entertaining, and have some news for us, so hopefully you can join us. Thank you all. Oh, just before you go, sorry. I would like to thank SACOR for sponsoring. Much appreciated. Thank the National Post as our print sponsor. This meeting is being recorded by Rogers and will be rebroadcast over the next few weeks several different times. And as you may know or may not know, we are now on Twitter and Facebook. We don't have a video game yet, but we're working on it.
We can fix that.
I'm sure you can. Danielle, all the best to you with your upcoming event, and thank you for not having it right here next to me. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed our event today, and we hope to see you again very soon. This meeting is adjourned.